It's time for Lykken on Lending.
Welcome, everybody. Good to have you with us.
Welcome to Lykken on Lending, a weekly mortgage market update providing up-to-the-minute information on interest rates, loan programs, and hot industry news, all related to the mortgage industry. Brought to you by Transformational Mortgage Solutions. To participate in today's program, our guest call-in line is 646-716-4972. Now here's your host of Lykken on Lending, David Lykken.
Let's begin.
Welcome, everybody. Good to have you here for another podcast. It's Monday, April 29th. Oh, those of you who are listening on a downloaded basis, and we're grateful to have you as our listener. Our commitment is to bring you timely information in an audio format that you can listen to anytime, anywhere. I want to talk about today's guest in the Hot Topic segment. I met a guy by the name of Dr. Alan Barnard. So he's one of the leading experts on the theory of constraint. We were talking just before the program, not surprising. The prophet doctor knew about the theory of constraints, had some thoughts on it, so it's going to be a great segment. I caught up with him this last week while he was in New York and had a chance to interview him. So without further ado, let's share that interview. Folks, I recently met someone that has really captured my attention and has got me thinking about a lot of the issues that we're facing in the mortgage industry. And I'm excited to introduce this individual to you, but pay attention and share this podcast because we're going to be talking to someone who has been studying for years something called the Theory of Constraint. And I'm excited to invite to the podcast Dr. Alan Barnard. Alan, so good to have you here.
Hi, Dave. It's an absolute honor to be on your podcast.
Well, quickly, folks, you'll listen. He has got an accent. He's from South Africa. And I want our audience to, first of all, just get to know you, Alan. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your educational background and how you got your PhD, and walk us through that journey, please.
I grew up in South Africa, and I was a pretty average kid in terms of academic performance, loved sport. And then we were asked to write these tests, and to our surprise, myself and my best friend, we were called up on stage and said that we had qualified and been selected to attend the school for gifted children. You know, I don't know who was more surprised, we or the teachers and the parents. But in any case, we loved this opportunity. You know, we loved the opportunity. We could work with computers, and there were goals, you know, so we thought this was fabulous. And almost immediately our marks started going up, our academic marks. And we overheard teachers and parents saying, oh, maybe it's now because they're more stimulated, etc. It was fantastic. We were just enjoying it. And then about 3 months into this, you know, my best friend got called to the principal's office. He came out and he was absolutely, you know, I could see very, very emotional. And he said that there was a mistake in the test and that he wasn't really gifted. That's what they told him. And, wow. Immediately I thought, oh, my God.
Devastating.
Just the worst thing that you can do to a kid, you know. And almost immediately his marks started dropping. And that was very interesting to me, is how can it be that when somebody tells you you're gifted, you perform as if you're gifted? And that set me on a sort of a journey of trying to discover what is it that helps us to perform at our level of the highest potential we have. I had a similar experience at high school that really made a big difference. I wrote an entrance exam. By this time, I was doing really well academically, and the results came back, and I said, sorry, Alan, you're in the D class, and D is for dummies. It was kind of the lowest class, and I said, clearly, you've made a mistake here. Look at my mark. And I said, sorry, the results don't lie. And almost immediately, my marks started dropping. And, you know, I thought back about what had happened in my primary school with this friend of mine. And then just by chance, my grandfather had given me this Reader's Digest book, and I was reading an article trying to think about, you know, how can I turn this around? It's just terrible. And I read this amazing quote by Henry Ford that probably many of the listeners will recognize. Whether you believe you can do something or can't, you are right.
So good. My dad introduced me to that statement when I was a young man, and it had such a powerful impact in how I perceive things. It is what we perceive our abilities to be, what we perceive we can do, or what others can do or can't do, that can be such a predictor of our success or failures in life in so many areas, personally and professionally. It's fascinating.
Yeah, so what happened was I started reading up on assumptions and limiting beliefs, etc. And what I realized that science teaches us is that you can't prove anything right. You can only prove it wrong. So I immediately started thinking about that in the form of assumptions and said assumptions and beliefs, you can't really prove them right. You can only prove them wrong. If you say you can do something and then you fail, okay, you've proven your assumption wrong. But what I realized, a better way of classifying assumptions is not to think of them as right or wrong or good or bad, but rather to think of them as helpful versus harmful. So believing I can do something can be very helpful if it gets me to try it, whereas believing I can't will be harmful if it causes me not to try it. And that sort of set me up on this journey. Later on I started working and I read this amazing book called The Goal. I learned about Dr. Eli Goldratt, and that's sort of what introduced me onto this journey of theory of constraints that you asked about.
So you met Dr. Goldratt, and you had an encounter with him, and I love this story. Tell our listeners about it.
Right, so this is a brief background. My older brother approached me in 1992 and he said I've been asked to read this book called The Goal and to implement it in their company. He was working in a steel manufacturing company. He knew I loved reading and I'd made pretty good summaries. I read the book and just fell in love with it. It was basically a story about a plant manager that's given 3 months, and unless he turns around the plant, it's going to be closed down. And he meets his professors, frustratingly just asking him questions, kind of using the Socratic approach. And through those questions, he develops his own breakthrough solution and saves the plant and ends up saving his relationship with his wife, etc. So I was fascinated. I wanted to meet the author of this book and had an opportunity early in 1993 to meet Dr. Eli Goldratt, who not only wrote a book, but he was the creator of something called Theory of Constraints. And I approached him, took up all my courage to approach him during one of the breaks and shared with him this very complicated scheduling problem that we had in our company. We were making cookware, pots and pans, and we were struggling to figure out if there's a promotion and you can't accurately forecast how much it's going to sell, how do you still make sure that you can reliably, meet these targets? And after listening very carefully to my very complicated question, he said to me, "So you're a very lazy person, aren't you?" And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Why don't you just think for yourself? Why don't you just figure this out?" I said, I came to this conference. You've done this. You're a world expert in this, and this is why I'm sharing. And he said to me, "No, I'm not going to take that opportunity away from you." And he kind of brushed me off. And I was really upset, really, really upset. I wanted to ask my money back for the seminar, but thank goodness I didn't. And that night I stayed up. I didn't sleep at all, and I solved the problem. And the next day, thank goodness it was a 2-day seminar, I walked back to him, in my most sarcastic tone of voice, said to him, "Thank you so much for the great advice you gave me yesterday." And he looked at me and he said, "That you solved the problem?" I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "And how does it make you feel?" I said, "No, pretty amazing." He said, "Young man, sit down." And he asked me to say, "What's your goal in life?" And I listed all the milestones I wanted to achieve. He wasn't very happy with that, so I tried to increase the milestones. He still wasn't happy with that. And then he stopped me and he said, "It's clear that my definition of a goal is very different to yours." And I said, "So what is yours?" He said, "Well, his goal was to teach the world how to think, and that he would be ready to die if he managed to achieve this goal or made meaningful progress." And that's how serious he took the goal. And he said, "What's your goal?" And I told him the story about my background. And I said, my goal was to help people see and unlock their inherent potential. And he was really impressed with that. And he said, "So how are you going to take this dream seriously?" And I said, "Well, that's one of the things I haven't figured out yet." And that's kind of how it set up this journey towards me doing my PhD in this field. Is, can you come up with a simple process that anybody can use? First of all, for them to see what their inherent potential is, and then secondly, coming up with a systematic way of unlocking that inherent potential to live a full and meaningful life, or to have an organization that's much more profitable than we expected before.
And listeners, those are the words that hooked me on Dr. Alan Barnard. I have the similar desire in my heart, is help unlock potential, help people overcome problems. And it is, as a consultant, it's a real challenge, especially when they're self-imposed, they're limiting. So you mentioned the theory of constraint. So let's go into and explain for our listeners as best you can, concisely, what is the theory of constraint?
So if you think about in science, we call something a theory, like theory of relativity or theory of evolution, when it's providing us with a useful explanation about why something is really important and useful. So if you hear theory of constraints, what you should expect is an explanation about why knowledge of a constraint of a system is really useful and important, especially as a decision maker in an organization or even in your own life. If you think about a constraint as like the weakest link in the chain, the chain is only as strong as its weakest link, which means if change that you're implementing is not strengthening the weakest link, it's not helping the organization. It's a complete waste of your scarcest resources. So how does knowledge of a constraint help you make better decisions? And it turns out there's sort of 5 decisions that we all make within our life and organizations. Is we have to set goals for ourselves. We have to decide where to focus. We have to make judgments about what the impact of a change will be on the whole system. We have to decide what rules to use and when to change these rules. And in each of these elements, knowing the constraint of the system really helps me to make better, faster decisions in each of those 5 decisions. I can set goals based on the potential of the constraint. I can decide to focus on the weakest link. I can judge the impact of my changes on how it will impact the weakest link. Will it make it stronger or not? If it does, then it's useful. If it doesn't, then find something else to improve. It turns out that the rules to maximize a constraint is also the rules to maximize the whole system. And when do I change the rules is when a constraint moves. And that's kind of how theory of constraints relates to helping us make better, faster decisions in life. And at a human level, of course, you have to ask, where's our constraint? What's limiting us from living fuller, more meaningful lives? And there's only one resource that we have that meets the criteria of a constraint, which is that demand will always exceed the available supply. And that's our limited attention. I think the listeners will probably resonate with this. If you think about just create a list of all the things that demand your attention every day, both at work and at home, and now compare that with your available attention.
That was so good.
Your attention will always exceed your available attention. So what and who you pay attention to will make all the difference in your life. So that's the link between, theory of constraints and improving organizations and also improving your own life, and obviously also the link with assumptions, because the decisions we make about what and who to pay attention to, those decisions are based on certain assumptions and beliefs that we have. So when we have limiting beliefs, they cause us to make and repeat bad decisions, and that then causes resources to become constraints or bottlenecks. We end up wasting so much of our attention paying attention to things that are not really going to be helpful to us or our organization. And that's kind of the link of finding out where the bottleneck is for an individual, is really understanding what is the limiting belief that's causing them to waste their limited attention by paying attention to things and people that's not really going to help them.
One of the things you brought up in one of your videos that I really loved, and I wanted to argue with it, but I realized you're right, and it has to do with multitasking. Talk about the fallacy of multitasking, if you would, and it just take a few minutes because I want to move on to some other things, but that is so fascinating. I'm trying to tease our listeners to want to go listen to all that you have out there on the YouTube videos. So talk about what is the fallacy of multitasking.
A great example is, when you multitask, it's really about, it's not doing multiple tasks at the same time. We have a cognitive bottleneck, so you can't do more than one thing at the same time that both requires cognition, So we can't drive and text at the same time. And we have a great little simulation game on our website that proves that to people. You get given a task to drive, and it's very easy to drive through all the obstacles, and then you get given a task to type in text, and it's very easy to do that, and then they ask you to do both at the same time. And what you end up doing is you end up messing up both. You drive badly and you text poorly because both of them requires the same cognitive capability. So what happens is when we multitask, we essentially are task switching. we're constantly switching between one thing and the other thing. And the assumption is that this is the best way of getting a lot of work done because we can show progress on all these things that we're busy with. And fundamentally below that, there's a kind of an assumption that says the sooner I start something, the sooner I will finish it. That is only true if I'm working on one thing. As soon as I'm working on more than one thing, actually the later I start something, the sooner I will finish it because I'm not wasting my limited attention in terms of task switching all the time. So if I have 3 things to do, what's the best way of doing them? Should I do a little bit of A and then switch to B and then C and then go back to A, B, C? The amount of task switching time that I will lose would cause me everything to take much, much longer. I'll get much less done compared to just starting with A, finishing, then B, finishing, and then C, finishing. So it's a great example of how a limiting belief that sounds quite common sense, which is the sooner I start with something, the sooner I'll finish it, is actually the cause of us getting much less done in our life and everything taking much longer. And if I just turn that around and say, as soon as I do two or more things, the later I start, the sooner I'll finish if I can focus and finish. Pick the highest priority, finish it, and then only switch over to the next one.
So fascinating. I want to talk about a book that you've published, and it's based on a story that happened at a mining company. And it's something, if I recall correctly, you stumbled into in a phrase. And the name of your book is It's Impossible, with a pause, Unless. And that really changed a company. Tell that story, and then we'll tell more people about this book and how they can get it.
Sure. I mentioned my passion and the goal of my research lab, Goldratt Research Lab, is about helping people find and overcome limiting assumptions. And one of the most devastating limiting assumptions is when we think that something is impossible, when we can't do something. And many years ago, about 2006, I was standing in front of a group of 60 miners. They had asked me to come in and teach them about theory of constraints and bottleneck. And I realized based on the body language that, presenting them with slides is going to probably get me thrown out of the window. They were not in the mood for that. And so I said to them, what's the problem? And I said, well, we've got a goal to achieve 12 million tons a year. We're now in month 4. We only have achieved 3 million tons. That's our problem. And I thought for that moment, how can I help them? There's no domain knowledge that I can bring in terms of radically improving the output of a mine. I don't understand mining, but I do understand human behavior. So there were 2 big things that I did. The first one, I said to them, okay, so that's clear now. So your task is not just to get back to about 1 million a month, but you'd have to actually run faster, about 1.2, 1.3 to catch up. So what I'd like you to do is to write down what is currently demanding your attention as a management team. So write down all the initiatives that you are currently working on. At about 100, I stopped them. And it was pasted all around the room in these big, flip chart pages. And I said, okay, what I'd like you to do now is to go back to each of those and write down how many additional tons this initiative will give you. And you can imagine what happened. There were about 3 or 5 out of that whole 100 that actually would give them more tons. All the other stuff was demanding their attention, consuming budget, and it wasn't going to help one bit with this problem. So I said to them, can we agree to stop most of those things? Because if we don't stop them, you won't have the attention and the budget to focus on the things that can actually happen. And immediately they agreed. It was like something lifted off their shoulders. But that still didn't help us to figure out how to get more tons. So at that moment, I called up the person that was in charge for the first step in the mining process, which is exposing the ore. And I called him up to the front, big guy, and I said to him, okay, so John, you have to get your operation to produce at about 1.3 million tons a month. How are you going to do that? And he just stared back at me. And I said, so how are you going to do that? And the next moment he shouted to me, it's bloody impossible. If it was possible, we would have done it already. And what do you do? And thank goodness at that moment, only thing I could come up with, I said to him, it's impossible unless, And I just let it hang there. And he was staring at me. I was staring at him. The audience were very uncomfortable. You can imagine the dynamic.
Oh, yeah.
And the next moment he looked at me, he said to me, okay, I'll play your bloody game. I said, well, it's not a game, but let's see if it could help us. And he started listing down the conditions that would make the impossible possible. But he pointed to the cost accountants and said, these guys will bloody never agree because, they're on this mission for us to save money. They're not willing to spend a bit of money to make a lot of money. And we quickly went through the calculations and said, your margins is about $20 a ton. What you say is true. If by hiring this bunch of, bulldozers to clean up the area, you could generate an additional 500,000 tons a month. This is 20 times 5, that's $10 million a month additional, and it's only going to cost you $1 or $2 million. That's a no-brainer. And he looked at the cost accountants, and they immediately approved it. And I then immediately repeated that exercise with everybody else in the chain. And as I was doing that, I still get goosebumps because I realized, wow, this is probably the simplest way to help any of us challenge and overcome a limiting assumption. So the way that we've applied it today and what a section of the book that you mentioned is about is to say, how can I use this? You say, pick any goal in your life or your organization and ask yourself if you think it's possible to achieve it. If you say yes, then increase the target, either in magnitude or shorten the time. And keep on doing that until you convincingly say to yourself or the whole team screams out, now it's impossible. And then all that you do is you say, it's impossible unless, ? And what that forces the brain to do is to start thinking about those conditions that, if it existed, would make the impossible possible.
Wow, that is just so powerful. And our industry is dealing with constraints. We're constrained on our earnings right now. Our earnings are near historical lows. We've fallen from 2012 from 102 or 108 basis points net profit per loan down to 14. Now, if you look over the longer period of time, we've been in these cycles before, and a lot of people go out of business during these times. So they say, well, we're constrained because our earnings are our costs, and they throw out all these objections. And that's why I was so excited to have you come on this podcast and talk about these principles and encourage people to get this book. And hopefully we want to get you involved in some real examples here in the mortgage industry. And we're very excited about promoting you and getting you out and bringing this wisdom, this knowledge and understanding to the industry, because we are dealing with some constraints. Loan officer compensation's at an all-time high. We can't afford that. The cost to originate a loan is up. The cost to make sure our loans are compliant is up. I mean, our costs are at record highs. It is impossible to make more money unless. And Dr. Barnard, I just want to get our audience exposed to this thinking. How can they get a copy of this book? Is this sold on Amazon, or where can they buy a copy of this book?
Well, I will send you a link where they can place pre-orders. We've got a review copy out at the moment, that we've...
Oh, that's right. I just looked at the back. I got a review copy. That's right. I'm so blessed.
We haven't formally launched it yet on Amazon, but if I'll send you a link, and then people that are interested can get put in some pre-orders, and I can also share with them a number of videos and other writings about this. There's a great article that has been written about this method. What the book focuses on is not just this method, but also another method that I've developed called the 5-step Pro-Con Cloud method. And what this does is it helps us to discover what those limiting beliefs are if they sit a little bit deeper normally, And what the process does is it just guides you through 5 steps, and each of the steps have been designed to prevent a common decision mistake. For example, what we find in many industries that have been around for a long time, there's a lot of inertia in those industries. They're so scared to change things. What the process does is it helps you to expose some of those exaggerated fears of loss or effort or risk that can cause good people to resist making good changes or choices within their industry. And on the other side, we also find that sometimes when things get so bad that people often overreact and make changes that end up being really bad for them or their organization. And the process also allows you to expose some of those exaggerated frustrations or exaggerated expectations that can sometimes cause us to overreact and make bad changes. So the book is about, here's a few simple methods that anybody can apply. Even kids, we are testing with kids. We've developed an app called the Harmony Decision Maker app that guides you through the same 5 steps. And it's been proven to be very effective, whether you're a kid dealing with bullying at school that you don't know how to deal with, or you're a CEO that's facing a major challenge in their industry. Their industry is fragile. They're harmed more by a downturn than what they could benefit from an upturn. By following this very systematic 5-step process in our app, you can actually discover and overcome some of these limiting assumptions and beliefs and lift your organization or your own life to a new level of performance.
5 steps of pros and cons. It's the Ben Franklin T-chart that we all have used in making decisions in the past, but this is now in an app. And you also have built in some theory of constraint in this. It really begins to open this up. How can people download that app? Where do they go? They go, in the case of the Apple Store, they go to the case of the Apple ecosystem, they go to the Apple Store or I guess the Play Store.
Yes.
So what should they look for? What's the name of it?
Absolutely. It's the Harmony Decision Maker is in all the app stores so far. So you can go to your favorite app store, either your Apple iPhone or iPad app store, and just search for Harmony Decision Maker. You can also find it on the Android, the Google Play Store, or even on the Amazon Store if you have a Fire or Kindle device. We've got apps for all of those devices. And we've tried to create the app in a way that people can use it themselves. So there's lots of help in there. We've got community libraries where people have shared their analysis on various topics, so you can search and see if you get stuck. Has anybody else dealt with a similar type of tough problem or decision to resolve? You can see the progress that they've made. You can see the assumptions that they've had to challenge and the results that they've been able to achieve. So it's called Harmony Decision Maker, and it's available in all the app stores. We also have a web app that you can go to, Harmony TOC, so TOC for Theory of Constraint, so just harmonytoc.com, and you can subscribe to our free web app there as well.
I am encouraging our listeners to do that, folks. We'll have links in our website on the show notes for this podcast where you can download this information. And I also am going to put in a number of videos to just begin to tease you on this, listeners. Get to know Dr. Alan Barnard. I was supposed to have a 1-hour meeting with him. That turned into 2.5 hours, and then we invited him to dinner with some friends of ours, Michelle and Francois Schultz, who are working now with Dr. Barnard, and very excited to see where this could go. Our industry needs this, and especially with some of the challenges our industry is facing. So I hope to get you involved in speaking at conferences and actually get some engagements within our industry, Dr. Barnard. So thank you so much for taking a moment to be here with us. If people want to reach out to you, what's the email address or other ways in which they can connect with you?
Sure. The easiest would be to go onto my website, dralanbarnard.com, or our company website, goldrattresearchlabs.com. And, of course, my email is just alan@goldrattresearchlabs. But I'll send all of that to you, and you can make it available for your listeners.
We'll put it in our show notes, listeners. You can go there. Alan, thank you so much for being a part of this. I'm so thrilled. What we just started off with, what I hope to be a very meaningful and long-term relationship. It's such an honor to meet you, and I'm so grateful that you took time while you're still here in the States to join us on this podcast. Thank you, sir.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Dave, for the invitation.
I recorded that, and I just was taking notes like crazy. It was really fun. Andy Schell and I are texting back and forth as we listened to that. Great stuff. If you want to check it out, go over, get his book, go to his website, go to our website. We've got all the links. Everything we talked about there, the links are in our show notes, and I encourage you to share this podcast with many others in your organization. I want to say a big thank you to you, our listeners, for being here. Next week in the Hot Topic segment, we've got Barrett Burns, President and CEO of Vantage Score. He'll be here talking about credit scoring method and a model with greater scoring power. And I want to say thank you for listening this week. Be sure to come back. A special thank you to our sponsors, Black Knight, Open Mortgage, Finastra, the MBA, Lenders One, the Mortgage Collaborative, Velma, Knowledge Coop, Vineyard, and of course, our special thank you goes out to our regulars, Alice, Andy, Alan, Joe, for their contributions each and every week. Have a great week, everyone. Look forward to seeing you back here next week.
You've been listening to Lykken on Lending, a weekly mortgage market update with your host, David Lykken of Transformational Mortgage Solutions. Join us next week, and thanks for listening.